Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, wherever you are. It's me, Ari Dosset, Rashid. I'm your anthropologist and sociologist. If you're Italian, come Emiliano, please. Thank you very much. For now, hit the like button, share this live stream, subscribe to the channel, become a member of the channel. Donate the links below. Thank you very much, everyone. If you want to book a session with me, a one-on-one consultation, check the fees and instructions in the description box below. Um, you can buy my novels on Amazon, Barnes Noble, where you can find them. And above all, I want you to pay close attention to this live stream. Take notes, pray about it afterwards, and and where this knowledge applies to your life, apply this knowledge to glorify Heavenly Father. Thank you. Now, before I continue right now, how are you all doing today? Just let me know. How are you all doing today? It's early in the morning over here. Truth being told, I just woke up also. I'm prepared though. No excuses. So let me see if I have all the what I want to show you right in front of me. Okay. But in any case, in this live stream, we are going to expose another abomination from ancient Greece. And as I mentioned before, in these series as opposed to the Greek deities or the Greco-Roman deities, we need to understand that the worship of these deities are all about facilitating and achieving a social outcome. There's an outcome that the public longs for. And to get this outcome, that's why they worship those deities. So these deities aren't worshipped for the deity's sake. So it's not as if the public loved or adored, for example, Apollo or Hermes or Zeus, whatever. Now, some did, but that was not the actual goal. It was all about the outcome in society that people insist upon. So that's why when you investigate things like the Greco-Roman mythology or the Germanic mythology, it's always important to focus also on what was the purpose of it, what's the function. The purpose, people may debate about the purpose. Absolutely. However, it's not about what people say it's about. It's about the actual function, the worship of this deity for accomplish in a community. All right. Before I continue with that, there's something I want to show you. Um, okay, let me share the screen. One moment. This is a book over here, Le Dieu grec genealogy from Beth de Courmayes. It's a book about the Greek deities in French, and it published in 2008 on the 1st of January. Uh, and 511 pages, so it's a big book. And it's written by this lady over here. Here, the Greek gods, genealogy, the Greeks, as I showed you right over here. But what's this woman over here? This slide we know about this woman. However, you guys talk about the Greek deities. So someone highlighted this towards me, and I consider it important to talk to you about this. I'll show you later why. Let's begin. Françoise Brenda Koolmeijers, born 10th of July 1953, is a French entrepreneur, philanthropist, writer, billionaire heiress. She is the only child of Liliane Bettencourt and the granddaughter of Eugène Schuller, founder of L'Oréal. She is the second richest woman in the world, with an estimated net worth of 88.2 billion as of July 2025, according to Forbes. Her mother died in September 2017, after which her fortune tripled with her investments through her family holding company. Tite invest at the high valuation of L'Oreal shares on the stock exchange. So she is one of the richest women in the world. Okay? She's married, has two children, an heiress of the L'Oreal enterprise. Raised to be Catholic, she has written several Bible commentaries. She is the only child and heir of Liliane Bettencourt. She married Jean-Pierre Myers, business executive and grandson of a rabbi murdered at Auschwitz. Oh, so you have the Ashkenazi connection over here. She converted to Judaism and they raised her children, Jean Victor and Nicolas, as Jewish. Her marriage caused controversy because her grandfather, Eugène Schuller, L'Oréal's founder, had been prosecuted for collaboration with the Nazi government. Bettencourt Myers and her family still owns a 30% stake in the company. At aroused age, she sued François-Marie Barnier for taking money from her mother and started proceedings to have her mother declared mentally incompetent. Revelations in the secret recordings that she used in evidence led to the World Bettencourt scandal. In 2010, Bettencourt Myers announced that she had settled out of court with both her mother and Barnier. Her mother died in 2017 when the net worth was about 39.5 billion. After a fire severely damaged Notre Dame de Paris, medical Myers and L'Oréal pledged 226 million to repair the cathedral. So as you know, there was a fire in 2019 that destroyed a portion of the Notre Dame, a monument in France. This was kind of a heartbreak for a lot of Europeans, and this woman, one of the rich women in the world, decided um, to assist to get it repaired. So Betty Myers, this is her. Okay, so she converted to Judaism, and she wrote a book about the Greek deities. This was published 2008. All right, good. Let me go back over here. Now this need to go to English. Oh, no, this is Spanish. No, we'll talk English over here. So, okay. So let me see. Can I find something about her husband? No, not really. But anyway, I dare to say she converted Judaism long before the publication of this book. I may be wrong about it. But anyway, what I'm pointing out here is the following. One of the richest women in the world spent her time discussing the Greek deities. That should show you that the worship of the Greek deities is still a relevant topic worldwide. So for people to say, well, it's just art, Rashid, no. If it's just art, they could use Buddhist art, they could use Japanese art, they could use even Germanic art. Why the Greek deities? Because as I mentioned before, the Greek deities used to be government and military policy for centuries in ancient times. Direct government and military policy. So that's why you have to consider all of this, y'all. You have to realize that if something is important or relevant, at some point it's going to be highlighted. And if the thing that's highlighted is not in harmony with what goes on in daily life, you really need to pay attention. But anyway, we're going to the deity right now. Um, so I'm going to read over here. There's also an article I may go into over here afterwards. But anyway, we're going to read here first. Wikipedia is accessible to all of you. some of these articles you need to be associated with university or be an alumni to get access towards them. Not all of you are like that, so okay, let's continue. In ancient Greek mythology and religion, Persephone, um, a classical pronunciation, Persephone, Persephone, also called Kore, or Lady the Maiden, is the daughter of Zeus and Demeter. She became the queen of the underworld after her abduction by her uncle Hades, the king of the underworld, who later took her into marriage. The myth of her abduction, her sojourn to the underworld, and her cyclical return to the surface represents her function as the embodiment of spring and the propagation of vegetation, especially grain crops, which disappear into the earth when sown, remain hidden for a period, sprout from the earth, and are harvested when fully grown. Now, before I continue, there's something we need to explain over here. When it comes to mythology and also the occult, there are two types of explanations. You have the esoteric explanation and the exoteric explanation. Sharing didn't work. Let me do it one more time. All right. Okay. Esoteric refers to hidden inner knowledge intended for a small specialized group, while exoteric refers to outer public knowledge meant for the general masses. Essentially, esoteric is the inner essence, meaning spirit, and exoteric is the outer form, apparent surface. Okay? Esoteric is hidden, exoteric is public. Esoteric focuses on the spirit essence, exoteric focuses on the form structure. Now, the story of a miracle exoteric, probably known, but the inspirational lesson on mystical experience of it is esoteric. Another, for example, the formula for Coca-Cola is an exoteric secret, easy to understand, but kept private, while a deep meditative understanding of reality is an esoteric secret. Okay, so you have esoteric with an S and exoteric with an X. The exoteric is external. What does the public know? How does the public interpret something? Esoteric is what it's really about. For example, you can have a hand sign that's considered the peace sign by people. But internally, people that belong to an actual cult know that the hand sign means something completely different. Okay? So you have a double meaning given to things. One for the public, who are outsiders, and another for the people inside the cult. And the cult often keeps the true meaning hidden because if the true meaning would come out, it would spoil their leverage over the community, especially if the meaning is not something honorable or positive. Okay, so let's continue over here. So what you read over here is an exoteric explanation of this deity, Persephone. Okay, but it's not the esoteric intention for her worship. Okay, let's continue. In classical Greek art, Persephone is invariably portrayed as robed, often carrying a sheaf of grain. She may appear as a mystical divinity with a scepter and a little box, but she was mostly represented in the process of being carried off by Hades. Wait, so if she's a deity that deals with harvest, food, farming, why was she mostly presented as an abductee, as a victim of incest, incestual sexual violence? This incest violence she was victim of. Why is she portrayed like that? So the incest part and the sexual violence part, I'll come to that later on. That is the esoteric meaning. But first, let's go reading. Persephone, as a vegetation goddess, and the mother Demeter were the central figures in Eleusinian mysteries, which promised the initiated a happy afterlife. Initiated. Eleusinian mysteries. The Eleusinian mysteries were initiations held every year for the cult of Demeter and Persephone based on the Panhelletic sanctuary of Eleusis in ancient Greece. So understand, each of these deities had its own cult. There was no thing as the Greek religion or the later Roman religion. Each of these deities had its own cult, its own temples, and its own followers. And often the followers followed multiple of these deities at the same time, and sometimes the cults were in competition or even at fight one another. That's really what it was in ancient times. Okay, so let's continue further. They don't tell you initiated. The origins of her cult are uncertain, but it was based on ancient agrarian cults of agricultural communities. In Athens, the mysteries celebrated in the month of Antisterion were dedicated to her. She is a goddess of marriage and childbirth in the region of the city Episephian Locris in modern Calabria, southern Italy. Her name has numerous historical variants. These include Persephassa and Persephata. In Latin, her name is rendered Proserpina. She was identified by the Romans as the Italic goddess Libera, who was conflated with Proserpina. Myths similar to Persephone's descent and return to Earth also appear in the cults of male gods. Okay. Now, we're not going into all the history, all of it, but okay, let's read this over here. The epithets or epithets were a way you described someone or a function of someone. A Persephone revealed her double function as chthonic and vegetation goddess. In Greek mythology, deities referred to as chthonic, chthonian were gods or spirits who inhabited the underworld or existed on the earth and were typically associated with death and or fertility. The sermons given to her by the poets refer to her role as queen of the lower world and the dead and to the power that shoots forth and withdraws into the earth. Her common name as a vegetable goddess is Kore. Gunther Zuntz considers Persephone and Kore as distinct deities and writes that no farmer prayed for corn to Persephone, no mourner thought of the dead as being with Kore. While that's just interpretation of someone, ancient Greek writers were, however, not as consistent as Zuntz claims. Now, Queen of the Plutarch writes. Plutarch was was an ancient biographer and historian. Plutarch writes that Persephone was identified with the spring season, and Cicero was an ancient Roman lawyer and old philosopher, calls her the seed of the fruits of the field. In Eleusinian mysteries, her return from the underworld each spring is symbol for immortality, and she was frequently represented on a sarcophagi. In the Orphic tradition, Persephone is said to be the daughter of Zeus and his mother Rhea, who became Demeter after seduced by her son. What? Did I tell you the sexual violence part plays an important role in worshipping of this deity? So allegedly, this female entity was the result of incest between a son and his mother, and then her uncle kidnaps her and forces her into a marriage. I mean, and she's the queen of the underworld, associated with death. Let's continue. The Orphic Persephone is said to have become by Zeus, the mother of Dionysus. So now there's also uh, a suggestion that she had children by her own father. Okay, let's continue. And let's read it over there. Queen of the underworld. In mythology and literature, she's often dreaded. Hold on. She's often called dreaded Persephone and Queen of the underworld, within which tradition it was forbidden to speak her name. Wow. Forbidden to speak her name. You need to understand the following. When it's taboo to mention someone's name, it's either because someone is considered way too important and way above the average individual, And therefore, if you're mentioning the name, if you're not allowed to, it's kind of blasphemy. Or, which is more probably, you're not allowed to mention someone's name because of the scandal that surrounds the individual. Okay, let's read further before I elaborate on this. This tradition comes from a conflation with the very old Chthonic divinity Desponia, the mistress, whose real name could not be revealed to anyone except those initiated into her mystery. As goddess of death, she was also called a daughter of Zeus and Styx, the river that formed the boundary between earth and underworld. In Homer's epic, she appears always together with Hades in underworld, apparently sharing with Hades control over the dead. In Homer's Odyssey, Odysseus encounters the dread Persephone in Tartarus when he visits his dead mother. Odysseus sacrificed a ram to the Chthonic goddess Persephone and the ghosts of the dead, who drink the blood of the sacrificed animal. In the reformulation of Greek mythology expressed in the Orphic hymns, Dionysus and Melinoe are separately called children of Zeus and Persephone. Groves sacred to her stood at the western extremity of the earth on the frontiers of the lower world, which itself was called House of Persephone. Her central myth served as a context for the secret rites of regeneration at Eleusis, which promised immortality to initiates. As wife of Pluto, she sent specters, ruled the ghosts, and carried into effect the curse of men. The lake of Avernus, as an entrance to the infernal regions, was sacred to her. Now, we don't really have to go further into all of this over here. The younger savior main, all that, the mixed daughter, the savior. You get all these. She was called Honey also. Uh, by the way, the still people they will call their wives or girlfriends Honey. Well, I know it's symbolic, but it's kind of interesting that this deity was called Honey also, or it was called at least called Honey in the language back then. Uh, not honey like in English now. You get what I'm saying over here. What's called sweet friend or soft. Now, the abduction myth. Now, I'm going to read this and a little, not all of it, and then I wanted to discuss the esoteric implication of this deity. Persephone's abduction by Hades is mentioned briefly in Hesiod's Theogony and is told in considerable detail in the Homeric hymn to Demeter. Zeus, it is said, permitted Hades was in love with the beautiful Persephone, the abductor, as her mother Demeter was not likely to allow her daughter to go down to Hades. Persephone was gathering flowers along with the Oceanids at the goddesses Pallas Athena and Artemis, as the Homeric hymn says, in a field when Hades came to abduct her, bursting through a cleft in the earth. In another version of the myth, Persephone had her own personal companions, whom Demeter turned into the half-bird sirens as punishment for failing to prevent her daughter's adoption. When Persephone was abducted by Hades, the shepherd Eumolphus and the swineherd Eubulus saw a girl in a black chariot driven by an invisible driver being carried off into the earth, which had finally opened up. Eubulus, Eubulus was feeding his pigs at the opening to the underworld, and his swine were swallowed by the earth along with her. This act of the myth is an etiology for the relation of pigs with the ancient rites in Thesmophoria and in Eleusis. Various local traditions place Persephone's abduction in different locations. The Sicilians, among whom her worship was probably introduced by the Corinthian and Megarian colonists, believed that Hades found her in the meadows near Enna, and that a well arose on the spot where he descended with her to the lower world. The Cretans thought that her own island had been the scene of the abduction, and the Eleusinians mentioned the Nicene plain in Boeotia and said Persephone had descended with Hades into the lower world at the entrance of the western Oceanus. Later accounts place abduction in Attica near Athens or in Eleusis. The Homeric hymn mentions the Nision or Mysion, which was probably a mythical place. The location of this mythical place may simply be a convention to show that the magical, distant, chthonic land of myth was intended in the remote past. Odd person disappeared to meet a search for her all over the earth with Hecate's torches. In most versions, she forbids the earth to produce, or she neglects the earth, and in the depth of her despair, she causes nothing to grow. Helios, the sun, who sees everything, eventually told Demeter that what happened, and at length she discovered where her daughter had been taken. Zeus, pressed by the cries of the hungry people and other deities who also heard of their anguish, forced Hades to return Persephone. When Hades was informed of Zeus' command to return Persephone, he complied with her request, but he first tricked her into eating pomegranate seeds. Hermes was sent to retrieve Persephone, but because she had tasted the food of the underworld, she was obliged to spend a third of each year, the winter's months there, and the remaining part of the year with the gods above. With the late writers Ovid and Hyginus, Persephone's time in underworld becomes half the year. It was explained to Demeter, her mother, that she would be released so long as she did not taste the food of the underworld, as that was an ancient Greek example of a taboo. Not taste the food of the underworld, as it was an ancient Greek example of taboo. In some versions, Ascalaphus informed the other deities that Persephone had eaten the pomegranate seeds. As punishment for informing Hades, he was pinned under a heavy rock in the underworld by either Persephone or Demeter until Heracles freed him, causing Demeter to turn him into an eagle owl. In early versions, Hecate rescued Persephone. On an Attic red-figured bell crater of 444 BC in the Metropolitan Museum of Art, Persephone is racing as if stairs from a cleft in the earth, while Hermes stands aside. Hecate, holding two torches, looks back as she leads her to the enthroned Demeter. In the hymn, Persephone eventually returns from the underworld and is reunited with her mother near Eleusis. The Eleusinians build a temple near the spring of Callichorus, and Demeter establishes her mysteries there. Regardless eat, of how she had eaten pomegranate seeds and how many, the ancient Greeks told the myth of Persephone to explain the origins of the four seasons. The ancient Greeks believed that spring and summer occurred during the months Persephone stayed with Demeter, who would make flowers bloom and crops grow bountiful. During other months, when Persephone must live in the underworld with Hades, Demeter expressed her sadness by letting the earth go barren and covering it with snow, resulting in autumn and winter. Now, there are various versions of the myth, as you can see. So, but it doesn't matter which version you take. One thing that's common in all of them is the abduction, or it's the kidnapping by our uncle, and also the incest. That's also part of it. So you have incest and abduction, and you have this female entity conforming to a new role in governing the underworld. Okay, now let's go here. Underworld. In Greek mythology, the underworld or Hades, or Hades, is distinct realm, one of the three realms that make up the cosmos, where the individual goes after death. The earliest idea of afterlife in Greek myth is that at the moment of death, an individual's essence, psyche, is separated from the corpse and transferred to the underworld. In the early mythology, dead were inextricably grouped together and led by shadowy post-existence. However, in later mythology, elements of post-mortem judgment began to emerge, with good and bad people being separated, both spatially and with regard to treatment. The underworld itself, commonly referred to as Hades, of this patron god, but also known by various metonyms, is described as being located at the periphery of the earth, either associated with the outer limits of the ocean or beneath the earth. Darkness and a lack of sunlight are common features associated with the underworld, and in this way provide a direct contrast to both normality and the land of the living, where the sun shines, and also with the brightness associated with Mount Olympus. The underworld is also considered to be an invisible realm, which is understood both in relation to the permanent state of darkness, also potential links with Hades as the unseen place. The underworld is made solely for the dead, and so mortals do not enter it, with only a few heroic exceptions, when it took a mythical catabasis. Now, underworld. Now, as I mentioned before, today, when you mention the underworld, we refer to the criminal world that is governed by the satanic cults. Now, back in the day, the satanic cults were in the open. They were not hidden at all. So what on the world do they mean over here? Okay, so they want to explain to you over here. Okay, civic death, civil death. There's also called, I believe it's also called civic death, but anyway, it's civil death over here. So we're gonna go with that. Civil death, civilitaire mortuus. It's the loss of all or almost all civil rights by a person due to a conviction for a felony or due to an act by the government of a country that results in the loss of civil rights. It is usually inflicted on persons convicted of crimes against the state or adults determined by a court to be legally incompetent because of mental disability. In medieval Europe, felons lost all civil rights upon a conviction. This civil death often led to an actual death, since anyone could kill or injure a felon with impunity. Under the Holy Roman Empire, this is an empire. This is an empire of somewhere in the Middle Ages. It's not ancient Rome. A person declared civilly dead was referred to as vogelvrij. In Dutch, you'll say vogelvrij, free as a bird, and could even be killed since they were completely outside the law. Historically, outlawry, that is, declaring a person as an outlaw, was a common form of civil death. Under the English common law, a living person could, under certain conditions, be considered legally dead. The three categories generalized recognized as resulting civil death were profession, that's to do with someone uh, joined religious establishments, like a monastery, called monastery death. Abjuration, when someone either forfeits their citizenship or when they were banished. Um, Now, you have various countries how this takes place. Now, let's go to social death. Social death, sometimes referred to as social suicide, is an extreme social rejection or disenfranchisement of someone by the wider society. It refers to when the target people is treated as if they are dead or non-existent. It is used by sociologists as Orlando Patterson and Zygmunt Bauman and historians of slavery and the Holocaust to describe the part played by governmental and social segregation in the process. Social death is defined by three aspects: a loss of social identity, a loss of social connectedness, and loss associated with disintegration of the body. In some social deaths are racial and gender exclusion, persecution, slavery, and apartheid. Governments can exclude individuals or groups from society. Examples: Protestant minority groups in early modern Europe, ostracism in ancient Athens, that Dalits in India, criminals, prostitutes, and outlaws. Institutionalization and segregation of those labeled with a mental illness, change in the identity of an individual. This was a major theme during the Renaissance. Now, so you have civil death and social death. Now, what's the difference between social death and civil death? Now, social death refers to wider society, or just maybe not even wider society, just the local community refusing to deal with someone. They don't actively murder someone or tell someone to F off, we don't want you around there, but just ignore someone and say someone doesn't exist. It's narcissistic abuse. So you could be, let's say, for example, I need to elaborate on this so you understand where we're going with this. Let's say, for example, Irish woman, so she's from European Celtic descent. Let's say she married an African man from Africa or from the Caribbean. If her family at home in Ireland are xenophobic and racist, if that's the case, then she may undergo social death. That means her relatives at her hometown don't talk to her, ignore her, act like she's dead, she doesn't even exist. She could be right in front of them talking, just ignore her. That's social death. It's narcissistic abuse. Now, social death is something done by a group of people, either by society as a whole or by just communities here and there. Now, you may say, Rashid, isn't this a lot of effort? Yes, but these things tend to happen. Now, civil death is when the government decides that you're not worthy to be protected nor considered, and therefore they excuse others harming you. like it don't matter. Now, you can face civil death by the government and still not face social death. If the government may decide, well, you don't actually matter anymore, but the public decides, hold on a minute, this is wrong, then you only face civil death, not social death. But here's the thing though, if you face social death, 9 out of 10 times you'll face civil death at some point also. Not always, often it is. And now social death and civil death have to do with the act of others towards you. Now, it simply means you're being abundant. All right? Now, social debt and civil debt exist in ancient times too. So people were subject to social debt or civil debt, whether the people were considered unworthy to be in a community or there were people that were too scandalous. For example, let's say you were molested as a child, you were violated as a child, okay? And this continued for a while. Now, your development as a human being was not only disrupted, but was also may have been stalled or harmed by this event. So as an adult, you either have arrested development psychologically or you have all type of mental health problems. Now, everyone can see that you're a damaged human being. The question is, how do you end up damaged like that? So if it comes out that you've been neglected by the community growing up, now that's a big scandal. So now people have to deal with a damaged adult. Because if the people damage you by neglecting you, by allowing this bad thing to happen to you, and they did nothing to help you out to recover, they have no entitlement, no right to demand any good behavior anymore. Because hey, they have to admit that they did you dirty. They have to admit that they failed you. And often communities and society absolutely not. Society never does this. And often even communities don't do this. They don't want to admit collectively we failed. So either they become hyper obsessed with the individual that molested you, and they kill the individual, imprison the individual, and act like they're the good people, and leave you struggle for the rest of your life, or they blame you for what happened to you, even though they know it's bullshit, you couldn't help it, you were just a child. Why they blame you? It's easier to blame the victim than own up that the group failed. Because if the group failed, that means each individual can be failed also. So you, as a victim, whether a victim of childhood abuse, childhood molestation, or whatever, or even as an adult, if you've been severely harmed through neglect, you could be ostracized. You could face social debt. Nobody even wants to mention your name because mention your name and mention your history would also expose the fault of the people. So understand this. In ancient Greece, community members would say people that were declared socially dead or civilly dead, those people were those who were banned. They were considered the living dead. They were still alive, but they were treated as dead. All these people together were called the underworld. So the underworld refers to all the people that were banned and abandoned by society and their own communities. Even the government abandoned them. So you weren't even supposed to mention these people nor associate with them, or you could face the same. So now that it's clear to you what the underworld refers to, let's go further with the myth. So you have the underworld, as well as explain what the underworld is. The underworld also refers to um, impoverished places that are neglected on purpose. Because remember, the people that face social death or even civil death, they're still alive. Some of them commit suicide because it's too much for them. Some flee to foreign lands and start a new life. But often the people are born like that, they lack financial means. They lack also the language skills sometimes to start over elsewhere. And the thing is, if you flee from your own community and go elsewhere, let's say you had someone from Athens that was declared socially dead by the people, even civilly dead, and they eventually flee to Sparta. In Sparta, another Greek city state, you're going to wonder how come your own police, your own city state don't want you. So you may face issues. Now, the individual could flee to Egypt in a ship or in a boat. But if they arrive in Egypt, the Egypt want to know, okay, but where are you from? What happened? Now, they may be able to start anew in Egypt, or if they flee, maybe to, let's say, to other places. But the thing is, once you declare socially dead or civilly dead, that's a stigma that has to follow you everywhere you are, because it's also a spiritual condemnation that's put upon you, like a spell. They cast a spell of misfortune on you. Now, and also people who have been declared socially dead or civilly dead, they tend to have bitterness and resentment also. Not always. So they also tend to, it also works against their own recovery. But anyway, when people are declared socially dead or civilly dead, they will still be around, but they would be living in either villages or towns that were overlooked or neglected. So the places where they resided are what they would call ghettos. A ghetto is a place that's neglected on purpose. So a ghetto can either be a town or a neighborhood that is severely neglected and it's even dangerous to live there. Not only physically, because things are quite dirty and filthy over there. So not only for your physical health is it risky over there, it's also there psychologically. And because these places are neglected and not considered, criminals and predators have easier access to harm and molest people over there, and often get away with it because the place is not even considered important enough to protect. So what we would call ghettos today, which includes underground communities of vagabonds, what's the homeless people, that was what they call the underworld in ancient times. Okay, so now that that's out of the way, so you have this female. Okay, I'm going to retell. I'm going to retell the myth of Persephone, but in a human way, without any deity association. Okay, just explain it better. So, okay, let's say it like this: you have a woman. Let's call her Demeter. Again, I'm retelling the myth now without any paranormal or divine associations, as if it's just a history that happened between human beings. Okay, you have this woman somewhere in ancient Greece called Demeter, who has her own farm estate. As a woman in that time period, she's quite honored, and she has a high rank in the community, which was rare. She has servants and slaves that assist her on a farm estate, and and her hus- her husband, or was it the father, or baby father, better said, is a bit off. He's a womanizer, even a rapist that goes around going after both men and women, even those who aren't even of age yet. So he's bad news. She doesn't even want to talk about her relationship with that man because even mentioning that man is an embarrassment. But anyway, she loves her daughter, and one day she comes home and she can't find her daughter anywhere. Persephone, where are you? She looks everywhere for her daughter. Eventually, she asks the slaves, "Have you seen Persephone?" She asked the servants. They didn't see her. They go around the town, go around the city. And then their farmers would tell her, "We saw her being abducted." And she got terrified. Abducted? Yeah. Finding out that her uncle, the uncle of her daughter, that he kidnapped her to and then the mother gets so upset, asking, "What happened to my daughter? Where is she at?" Then eventually she warns the authorities. The authorities get involved, and they found out that um, the brother of this woman, who's the uncle of her daughter, this man was banned from the city state. Other city states don't want him also, so he lived in some abandoned village together with other people who've been banned. So he lived in a ghetto, and he became a crime boss in the ghetto. So Her brother, who was a crime boss involved in trafficking little girls and also trafficking grown women, he did the same to his niece, which is her daughter. So she got so upset, and she even put pressure on her ex-partner, who's the father of her daughter, to do something about it. Get our daughter back. You have all this connection, you have all this cash around. Get our daughter back. Eventually, um, in the ghetto, the uncle proceeds to molest his niece, and it goes on for years. And eventually, the niece adapts to her situation, but she decides, you know what? Since I'm sleeping with you and I have no choice, at least I want to know what goes on over here. So eventually, because he's a crime boss, the ones that serve him introduce her to all the ins and outs of the ghetto, how it works, and eventually she ends up running the ghetto together with her uncle. And the other women, were the trafficked women over there, kind of look up to her, not because they so-called love her or they trust her, but because A, she was trafficked too, but A, she's family of the one who trafficked us, and she can relate to us to some extent. So let's ask her for favors to ease our suffering over here. And eventually, Persephone even helps some of these women escape and go back to their families. And she makes an excuse to her uncle for it. Now, long after after a few years, eventually they found out where the uncle had his headquarters, and they threatened him, "Bring back your niece, or we're gonna come and kill all of you over there." So eventually, but the thing is, the niece now, in this case, Persephone, she participated in the ghetto life, in the rituals. She was part of some assassinations. Also, she was fully involved, and because of that, she was not considered part of those who are banned. So when she returned back to her mom, of course, her mom was glad to see her all the time, but she was not the same Persephone anymore. She was not that beautiful maiden would look forward in life naive like she used to be before. She was someone completely different. Her mother even recognized her anymore. She knew she was different, and she couldn't go back to the old life. So she actually ended up going back and forth between the ghetto and common society. And common society preferred her to go stay in the ghetto, but you know she was a victim, and nobody kept her uncle in check. And if they did not create those ghettos by banning all these people, then you wouldn't have a crime boss like her uncle anyway. So anyway, the public knew she ended up the way she ended up because we failed her. Now, as an adult, she has the obligation now to look at herself and seek for help and improve absolutely. But the thing is, we still made her what she is today. We're part of it too. But nobody wants to admit that. So now it, they kind of admit she's there, but they really don't want to admit she's there. Okay, I just retold the myth of Persephone as an actual human history. Do you understand now what the worship of this deity is really about? It goes on to this. It goes on to this. Look, human communities and also wider society does not want to own up to failures. They want a politician to own up to a failure and go to prison and go down, either by resigning or by being or by crash financial whatever, or they want some strange outsider to be the villain, and then they ban the villain or they kill the villain. But what human beings in the fallen state don't want is to collectively admit we failed. And if you admit that your group failed, if no matter how factual and true it is, other people in the group who don't admit failure may turn on you and want to fight you. Some even want to take your life. So this is something quite serious. Human beings in this fallen state always look for some victim to blame. And it's not just narcissists who do this. It's just this is how the world works. at its core. So, just like I explained to you before, what they called the underworld in the ancient times simply meant the ghettos, the parts of the world that were neglected on purpose because people didn't consider those to be important. Now, those neglected people eventually still need to survive. So they end up at the mercy of criminals, predators, all types of horrible people. So, but then they want to blame the people that were born into these ghettos for how they are, even though the ghetto, they didn't choose to be born in the ghetto. Now, people were bent to the ghetto. That's different. But even then, they were bent over there. So what I'm saying is, ghetto formation is a result of communities and societies banning and abandoning people because they don't want to deal with these people. And often they don't even have a good reason why they want to ban these people. It's just that they don't want to own up to failure, so they project a failure on certain people. Now, those certain people now end up living as vagabonds somewhere, having their own small towns or neighborhoods, and those neighborhoods are considered ghettos off limits. Don't go there. This is not a good place. But here's the thing, though. Ignoring these ghettos don't mean they don't exist. They're still there. They still have an impact. And there's another thing. Even those who are not banned, but are still into the common society or the core community, they face the threat of banishment. Now, all this fear causes sexual dysfunction into people. Because sexuality isn't just a man putting his dick in a vagina. Or it isn't just about procreation or sexual intercourse. Sexuality is how you function as a man or as a woman. Sexuality has to do with your core function as a human being. Sexuality, therefore, is something spiritual that works out in the physical. Sexuality with human beings is not something biological, it's not something physical. It has a biological outworking, but it's something spiritual that begins in the mind. As sexual beings, we need a stable identity in a community for us to function as individuals. And our group needs to have a good reputation to also. When those two are lacking, the sex dysfunction by default. With sex dysfunction, there's also lack of trust between community members. So, sexual dysfunction is quite dangerous because it eventually leads to addictions, obsessions, controlling behaviors, dysfunctional dynamics. It leads to also sexual violation like molestation of children or rape or gang rapes or false accusation of rape even. So all types of harm come forth from sexual dysfunction. But the thing is, fallen mankind can't rid themselves of sexual dysfunction. The only way for sexual dysfunction to cease to exist in the human species is if everyone admits that Heavenly Father, He is the Lord, He owns us, He owns the earth, He designed us as male and female. We follow His guidance according to His design. Only then will all narcissistic tendencies dissolve from the human species, and we'll all be complete, live life in completeness without any injury. But as we know, in this world, that's not happening. Because even many believers were not following the guidance of Heavenly Father. So, sexual dysfunction is a plague that haunts fallen mankind. Generation of generation, century of century, millennia of millennia. So, each society has to find a way to cope with sexual dysfunction. Now, in ancient Greece, no, ancient Egypt, uh, yet prostitution was institutionalized as a way to bring relief to the masses, similar to ancient Babylon. Now, I don't think prostitution not exist in ancient Greece. I mean, like, of course, it did. But what they did in ancient Greece over time was that they had to find a way to deal with the women that were affected by all these banishments. They had to deal with the women that survived abandonment. What do you do with women that survive abandonment? They're mentally gone, emotionally a train wreck, and they know what happened to them. It's too much for them to handle, so they're going to crash. You're going to. So, what do you do with women like that? What you do is you make sure that you give them female role models who were once just like them, but who now sold out to get a better life. And this strategy is also used today by pimps and human traffickers worldwide. They traffic a bunch of women or even girls, because those are easier to traffic because it's smaller. They kidnap a bunch of females, traffic them across borders, and when the victims arrive at the brothel where they're supposed to, offer their bodies for the commercial gain of the pimp, what happens is often there's a woman there that becomes the safe person to go to. Now, that woman could be a prostitute who's been there for a while. That woman could even be a relative of the pimp, or that woman also could be one of the a traffic victim that eventually worked up into the hierarchy, and now as in order for her to get uh, a bit more liberty, and she assists the traffickers now. It could be that 10 years ago, a woman was trafficked, and now over time she had sexual relations with her trafficker, and now the trafficker was also a pimp now. Um, Wants her to help out traffic other women, and in exchange, uh, she gets an allowance. That means that she could go out shopping, wearing luxury brands. She even has a fake career as a model. She has this. So her her pimp will now set up this fake model agency, and now she now is like a supermodel. I mean, the pimp pays for uh, photographers to take a lot of photo shoots with her, posts it online. She's now the so-called supermodel, at least, and she actually does modeling work. But the thing is, she does the modeling work as a front to assist the trafficker. So she now becomes the so-called safe person for the traffickers to go to, not to help them get out, but to help them stay there in the bad situation. Now, apart from actual trafficking, you can also have, um, let's say, a toxic workplace somewhere where there are women who are mentally damaged, total neglect, and everyone is blaming them instead of blaming the parents and the fact that they, as a community, didn't do anything about it. Now, these women, they're alive, they're able to have children. A lot of them look good also, so they're sexually desired by others. So they have potential that society wants to profit of. But society doesn't care about them, but about what society get out of them. How are you going to trick women like this to comply and allow others to take advantage of them? You give them a female role model that can quote unquote relate to them and then can coach them into continuing in the bad situation. And that's how society bails themselves out from sexual dysfunction. They take witches who are willing to sell out anyone just for a luxurious lifestyle or just for some social recognition. Because there are women desperate like that out there. Actually, there are quite a lot of them. Not all women are like that, of course not. But you have a minority of women who are so desperate for recognition or some fleeting luxury, they're willing to put others at risk just to get it. You take a witch who's a sellout to bond with the downtrodden women, so the women feel recognized, and because women now emotionally bond with her, she now becomes like this mother figure over them, and that she will coach them to not betray the system that's exploiting and abusing them. So the worship of Persephone, that is really what it's about. Now, again, the exoteric interpretation can vary. You have feminists today who retell the myth in such a way to show female empowerment. A woman that survived uh, uh, sexual violence, and now she's thriving. They try to turn it into an inspirational story, and you can do this with these myths. You can take a myth and turn it into a motivational story. You can do that. Nobody stops you. Just know that the original intent of the myth was not this motivational story you're telling people. Now, I don't mind if people use, for example, the Persephone myth and retell it in a constructive way to motivate people ahead in life. I mean, if people are of the world and they need motivation to get them out of depression, you can use worldly stories to motivate them. I don't mind that. However, the wider public should know what it's really about. Amen? Now, what does this have to do with believers? Now, ghetto formation happens till the day Christ comes back. Even Jesus said, the poor you always have amongst you. Why? Because fallen mankind, um, they, by intended neglect, establish ghettos as a way to get narcissistic supply. So Christ said, the poor you always have amongst you. So that does not mean that we shouldn't make effort to shut down poverty anywhere we can. It simply means that the world will always resist and bring back poverty, no matter whatever you make. Poverty will be fully abolished from the earth when Christ comes back. But up until then, in his lifetime, what do we do as believers? We ought to pray, decree, and declare against the cult of Persephone, her servants, her worshippers, and all patterns similar to it. So they don't have an effect on us. Because understand this. Um, the cult of Persephone still exists, but it's adopted by the by criminals, by drug cartels, also adopted by religious cults, also adopted by even some corporations that have female unfriendly policies. So the cult of Persephone is much bigger than you think. So at some point you will encounter it. Now there are female believers. There are women who come to Christ who used to be the ones taken advantage of by society, and we used to be the targets of these Persephone establishments. Or sometimes some of the women who were the quote unquote mentrix or role models for the world that become believers. Anyway, there are people from that side of society becoming believers. They need a place to heal, recover, and to be loved and taken care of. Also, we as believers have to counter this Persephone cult or whatever establishment uses this pattern by showing that we don't abandon our people. To the best of our ability, we look after our people. Only when we really can't do anything anymore do we let them go. Do we shake us our feet? At some point, we do shake us off our feet when we're not just doing it just because we feel like it. That's really the attitude we need to have in life, in general. Then he say that by the love you have for one another, will people know you're my disciples? Well, as believers, it's the love of God that works in our lives. That's what distinguishes us from the rest of the world. The love of God does not mean we always have warm, happy feelings for everybody. Because sometimes you encounter horrible human beings and you don't feel so good about them. Admit this process, but then go back to walking in love in a state of joy. So eventually you have a joyful attitude towards everyone, even the most horrible of people. That does not mean you now give them ox towards you or that you seek relationships with them. It simply means that you operate in the love of God, you're in a state of joy permanently, and nobody can determine your happiness on the inside. Amen? It's easy. We pray, decree, and declare against the deity Persephone, and against this cult and all establishments that mimic her. And we also do what we can to have a constructive attitude and a constructive role in the community so that the fear of abandonment reduces. There will always be fear of abandonment in the world till Christ comes back, but we should reduce fear of abandonment as much as we can as believers. How? Having joyful, exciting lives, glorifying them, Father. This is how we do it. Exciting does not have to be that you're traveling all the time. Exciting can also be you have a you have a regular life over here, but there's always good news with you. It could also be that you're traveling around often from event to event. But anyway, we should have joyful, exciting lives despite all the violence and retaliation against us. And that's how we glorify the Father. Amen. This is why Jesus also had women that support his ministry back then, and he allowed it. Jesus was countering the establishments of these Greek deities. That's what he was doing. That woman at the well, the sexualist woman at the well that Jesus incorporated in a mission. Yet Mary Magdalene was incorporated too. Listen, Christ is about redemption. It's about restoring people. So we need to follow his footsteps. That does not mean that we approach just any woman uh, that's questionable or was in severe need. We need to use wisdom because we're not, even though we follow Christ, we're not Christ. Nevertheless, we use our impact to reduce the fear of abandonment in the population. When the fear of abandonment reduces, these cults lose the leverage over the people. And again, if you want to do your own research, there are many articles out there you can find, even on Google Scholar. Um, so, oh yeah, and in Rome, Persephone was called Proserpina, and so you can look for this yourself. Oh, and hold on, let me go back. No, not the underworld. Let me go back here. Yeah, let me go back all the way down. In art, this deity is been portrayed a lot also. And you also had this team called the Rape of Persephone. It was also a team in art. Actually, I believe it still is. But okay, let me see. Should we go through a little bit of this article? You know what? I'm gonna let you do your own research also. And remember, you have the exoteric meaning, which can vary from place to place, which even turn into a motivational story. But then you have the esoteric meaning, the actual intent of a myth, and I just explained the esoteric intent towards you. Okay, let me close this down. Are there any questions about this topic? Let me know in the live chat. And is it clear to you what we as believers can and should do to counter the cult of Persephone? Are there any questions? I have 3 more live streams I planned for today. I take breaks between each of them because I want to go through these deities to give practical instructions, practical information for believers. And also, if you're an unbeliever, you can learn and benefit from this. So, in general, I want to expose the Greek deities, the Greco-Roman deities, so you know how to recognize the workings in your environment, in your life, how to be freed and stay free from the straps, so you can glorify Heavenly Father in peace. Amen. All of you over here, Donate the links below, please. Donate the links below. Thank you very much for your contribution. You help out very much. For now, I'm going to take some break, get something to eat for the next live stream. And which live stream is next? Let me look. Let me look, y'all. Let me see which one I've planned next. Hold on, y'all. Um, the next one, if you start in 35 minutes, it's about Hades, also in Romance Pluto, the ghetto deity. So to be frank, Persephone is a female ghetto deity. That's what she is. This Nephilim is worshipped to maintain ghettos so that the public retains no such supply. That's what she's about. In this case, no such supply out of women who nicely comply with their own exploitation. That's really what she's all about. But anyway, I'm going to take my break now. Don't links below, everyone.